Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. In this video I want to talk about The French Lieutenant's Woman, a modern classic by John Fowles. So I picked this book up at the library just before it closed down for the lockdown in December. And now it's February, we're still in lockdown, so the library is still closed, so I still have it. Which is good because ever since I reading it, I keep thinking about it and I just have so many thoughts in my head that I feel like I need to talk about it a little bit more, so I'm making a whole video about it. I have so many things and I found it so fascinating for so many reasons that I really had to put these thoughts down. So yesterday I took out my notebook and I wrote a lot of pages here, and I'm like, Amalia, do you want to talk about all of this? This is gonna be too long. But anyway, now the thoughts are out of my head and on paper, so maybe I can be a bit more coherent when I talk about it. I picked this up also because on the back it looks like that this is a romance set in Victorian times. And I like the Victorian times, and I like a classic, and I like a good romance. So I was like, why not? I've never heard of this author or this book before, so I was like, I'm gonna give it a go. It's not a book to read if you want to read a romance, though, I have to say it from the start. And from that point of view, it was a bit of a letdown, and I feel like a lot of people would be let down because of that. This one is to read if you like classics set in the Victorian times, because I feel that in a way, this is kind of an expose of the Victorians. So basically, John Fowles published this book in 1963, but it is set in 1867. And he writes about these Victorians by really exposing them and looking at them from a perspective of a modern man and with modern thinking, and just thinking in a way that these Victorians really led a restrictive life for so many reasons. So when this came out, this was really highly acclaimed, and it was said that it's really a modern novel because it's even though it's a Victorian novel, set in Victorian times, I would say it's the better way to put it, but it is not written from the perspective of an omniscient narrator, so the author and a narrator who knows everything. This book has one of the most weird chapters I've ever read in a book, because we have chapter 13 where the author kind of reveals himself as the author, and I think I feel like he has done it like slowly in really small parts also up to chapter 13, but it's there where he's like, hey, listen, this is me, the author, and I know that maybe this chapter is supposed to be about this and this, but I don't know really what's gonna happen to these people. They can do this, they can do that, but who am I to decide? I'm the author, I created these people, but I can make them do things. But I feel like the more I write about these people, the more they feel like they're real, and they feel like they should make their own choices. So he's kind of giving them their freedom. At the same time, as I said, like, this is kind of an expose for me, because I feel like the author is looking at this era and the Victorians from like 100-year distance, and he's kind of analyzing them and researching them and just showing us who they were. And in a way, it feels like he kind of takes this researcher perspective and puts himself also in the story, because you can see him appear and looking into these people from a distance. So you can't really say that he is apart from them. He's in there. He is influenced by what's happening to these people, but he also gives them their free will. And I just feel that's such an interesting way to write a novel, and especially at that time I think it was really innovative, and especially I think in the US it was very, very popular because of the main character, who is the French Lieutenant's woman. I think she was such a mysterious, or she is such a mysterious woman in this novel, that I think people at that time recognized the modern woman in her. And it feels like she's kind of trapped in that era. So we begin our novel with Charles, our main hero, and Ernestine, his fiancée, and they're walking by the Cobb in Limes Regis. And there's immediately a reference to Persuasion by Jane Austen, so I really like that. And there they see this mysterious woman looking out at the sea. So Ernestine is visiting her aunt. She goes to Limes Regis for a few weeks every year just to be by the seaside. And then Charles, as her fiancé, is also there to be together with her. And then slowly the novel begins by setting the scene and just getting our main characters introduced. So of course we have Charles, we have Ernestine. We also meet Sarah, who is the French lieutenant's woman. We also meet Sarah's employer, Mrs. Poultney, who is an older widow. And we meet a few servants. So let's talk a little bit about Charles. He is a rich young man, he's 32, and he's going to be a baronet. I think that's how you pronounce it, I'm not sure. But it is his uncle who holds the title, but with his uncle's passing, the title and the estate and the money is gonna be his. So he has really good prospects. And he's one of those typical, I would say, Victorian men from the upper classes who are rich and have everything life has to offer at their disposal. He's one of those idlers, I would say. He really wants to figure out what he wants to do in life, but he is not rushed by anything. He has money, he can decide, but he feels in a way that he needs an occupation, even though that's not necessary for him. So at times he feels a bit pressured by himself to figure himself out and to just pick something that interests him, but also something that would be useful for the whole of society, I would say. And already at the page 3, when we meet Charles, the author gets going with the comparison of the Victorian times and the modern times. And it's just, I mean, 1963 is a long time ago already, but the way the author writes about his own time feels very much how we are today, whereas it's like almost feels like we are in a race against time, and there's just so many things we have to do, but there's just not enough time. And this is very different from how the Victorians were, because there the time was really slow, everything was much more slowly paced, and they just really had time to do, take their time with everything. There was no rush, and especially for the upper classes, and especially for Charles, for example. And this is kind of a symptom of wealth, because he was a privileged man to be able to do whatever he wanted with his time. When the author compares these two times, he says that the Victorian times were like a tranquil boredom, whereas modern times is like a destructive neurosis. And then we have Ernestine, who apparently is a typical Victorian young lady. She is rich, she's very pretty, she's pale, delicate, small. And it says here, at first meetings, she could cast down her eyes very prettily, as if she might faint should any gentleman dare to address her. But at the same time, that she has something in her eyes which kind of denies her apparent total obeisance of the great god man. So there's just something about her which I guess sets her apart from all her other peers. The author calls prim little moppets. So I guess this is what drew Charles in. So yeah, but now that they are engaged, Ernestine really feels that she's really counting down the days to the marriage, to the day when they get married. And there's just something she's rather like expecting from the marriage and from what's gonna come afterwards. But at the same time, she has a very typical way of thinking about marriage and what her duties are or will be as a woman and as a married woman. And then let's see, she sometimes wondered why God permitted such a bestial version of duty to spoil such an innocent longing. Most women of her period felt the same, so did most men. And it was no wonder that duty has become such a key concept in our understanding of the Victorian age. And I just feel that it's so interesting because again here you can tell that the author really puts his mark on how the Victorian era was and how these people thought and how women thought about being married and the marriage bed, so to speak. And yeah, and I think as we move forward with the novel, we really get more into this and through Charles's experiences and also through his relationship with Sarah, the French lieutenant's woman, we really get to see that aspect of the Victorian era much more than reading an actual Victorian novel, because those intimate relationships between couples are not really discussed. So from that perspective, I feel like it's really a fresh take on the Victorian era and the novels and the people. And I just felt it's really interesting the way it looks at these characters. And especially because of Sarah, our main character, who is just so different from all the other women of her era. Because yes, she is a fallen woman. She is the French lieutenant's woman. So we all know what that means. I mean, it's pretty clear. Even by the title, you kind of feel like, is Sarah a woman in herself? Does she have her own personality, her own presence in the novel? Or is she just someone else's woman? And I think that's also one of the things a lot of the critics talk about when discussing this book. Whether this is a very feminist novel where we talk about Sarah and how modern and different she is and how not of her time she is, or whether she is not a feminist icon at all because we only see her through the male gaze. So I think that's a good interesting way to look at this novel as well, because yes, I would think that there's some feminism in here because she's so different. She really rejects her part in society. She really rejects the role society set out for her. She takes ownership of herself and her role as a woman, and even though she is really in a bad position, because what can a Victorian fallen woman do apart from leaving and moving somewhere where no one knows her? She's a fallen woman, and that mark will follow her wherever she goes. But not Sarah. She really kind of stands there also from the beginning of the novel in front view of everyone, and she's just like, this is who I am. It's not like she doesn't care, but it almost feels like she has that defiant way about her. And she's really an intelligent woman. And I think the author says that also kind of like really unfortunate for her to be this intelligent, because she's really between two classes. Her father gave her an education, so she's kind of like a penniless, genteel woman who cannot marry someone from her class because now she has education, so she knows more. And she's not at the same level with those people. But at the same time, she really can't marry up as well because of what her background, and of course because of what happened to her. And many times when you read a Victorian novel, there's no in between when it comes to these characters. You are either from an upper class or you're either from a lower class, and it's just interesting to see her as hovering somewhere in between. I just feel that it was so interesting. So don't read this as a novel, as a romance novel, because it's not. Even though there's elements in it, but I think for me, I enjoyed it more as a character dissection, just finding out who these people are and how they relate to their own time and how they're different they are compared to modern times. And it's interesting because the novel references Darwin and the origin of species over and over. And at the beginning, there's like a section where they're talking about how, because of some research, there is no there is no new species to be discovered, and how at the end the author says that a new species was born here, and that new species is Sarah, the modern woman. And I thought that was really interesting. So I could go on and on about this novel, and I'm pretty sure that I left out some of my notes I wrote down here, but I just feel like maybe this is a novel I would like to read again and just read a bit more closely. I really loved also how at every beginning of the chapter there were like one or two quotes, and I think those quotes also gave a deeper understanding as to what the chapter is going to be about. And especially towards the beginning, there was this quote about how many more women there were in England at that time compared to how many men, and how I guess that already sets the scene as to why maybe Ernestine is so is so nervous of being married already and counting down the days, because who knows what can happen. Anyways, I'm gonna stop talking about this now, and let me know if you have read this and what you thought about it. I think a lot of people, as I said, I think a lot of people would be disappointed, and I was too. But as you kind of noticed, there were so many other elements I felt fascinated by in this book that I just had to continue on reading, and I mean, it's like it's been in my mind ever since I read it. And after I did a little bit more research into this, I actually found out that this novel is based on the author's life. So I will leave you there. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.